Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Matt Scott, and also Dave Harriton and Matt from TruckHouse. So we had the unique opportunity to sit down with two incredible engineers, one being Dave Harriton, that is the CEO and lead engineer of American Expedition Vehicles, and then, of course, Matt from TruckHouse, who has himself and a team of engineers that are making one of the lightest, most capable expedition vehicle campers on the market. So we go into a lot of information around why a lightweight camper is important, how they achieve that feat. We also talk about some of the technology that allows that to happen. We dig deep into why the full size really works, why they move from a Toyota Tacoma to a full size. We get a little bit of history on Matt's early life in a shipyard, where he learned a lot about the importance of reliability and longevity. But this is a really great conversation. And again, this is not any paid content. We receive no compensation from TruckHouse. We just believe that this is a very unique and relevant new product on the market.
So we're talking about the TruckHouse BCR with Dave from AEV and Matt from TruckHouse.
I think we should start off by letting the audience know what BCR stands for.
Yeah, well, that's it's an Easter egg. You got to buy it to find out. But
the one for public consumption. The one for public consumption.
It's a funny story, honestly. We started with that Toyota.
Yeah.
And we called that the BCT. And I'm sure you guys are aware, but naming things is incredibly hard. Naming a company, naming a product.
It's all hard, yeah.
It's so hard. But when we were building that first prototype Toyota camper, kind of in stealth mode, no one knew about it. Nico walked out of the shop one day and walked into the shop, and I just put the long travel kit on and threw the 35s on. And he looks at it and goes, "Dude, that is a beefcake taco." And I said, "Man, you just described the truck with 3 weird foods." And it stuck. And so we kept calling it the beefcake taco. And then we're like, when we came to name the product, BCT stood out. And
yeah, but you had a great
backcountry truck, backcountry Toyota,
which is really funny.
Yeah.
But it worked out really well.
It did.
It's hilarious, and it also worked out.
And then moving into the Ram, BCR kind of transitioned to backcountry Ram. Internally, we say beefcake burrito, which is like a taco. It's a burrito.
It's a little bit more of a burrito than a taco.
This guy talked to me for like an hour during breakfast about CNC machining foam, and he didn't even tell me that actually entertaining story.
That's why I remembered it. Like, these are the little Easter eggs that I remember for the podcasts.
So
awesome.
the TruckHouse BCR, if you're not familiar with it, it is kind of a new generation of expedition vehicle. It is built with a carbon fiber monocoque chassis on a Prospector XL truck. It's really, really cool.
The thing about it is it's really, really light. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about impressions later, but there are a few things that make this camper world class, which is why we have these guys on the podcast today. I mean, many of you have heard Dave and us talk in years past on many podcasts, but like to have someone like Dave and AEV involved with developing the chassis and getting this thing, ready to mount an incredible camper to, and then Matt, all of your experience building expedition class boats where people are literally relying on your work to not die somewhere out in the middle of the ocean. It's this interesting confluence of skills, but also a real need in the market. The expedition trucks have gotten heavier and heavier, and as a result, less capable and less safe. We all need to remember that 20,000 pounds going down the road needs to be stopped, and it needs to be turned.
Yeah.
So, and if you do either one of those things quickly, like under duress, which unfortunately happens in life, like stuff runs out in front of you, like children or goats or whatever. And if you need to stop and turn at the same time, in most of these expedition campers, hopefully you'll miss whatever you're trying to avoid hitting, but there's a good chance that the thing's going to end up on its lid. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's a huge part of our design, and Dave's really helped hammer that home about how important vehicle dynamics are. And, Dave and AEV are some of the best in the industry at understanding how important that stuff is. So it's been...
Well, and maybe, Matt, we take just a minute before we dig a little deeper and just kind of make that be something that the audience sits with throughout the conversation. Is yesterday you guys were describing what you were doing to validate basically a slalom or an emergency lane change. Dave, why don't you talk about what that test is, why you do it, because you do it with all of your vehicles. So like even a prospector on 40s needs to achieve this same outcome. So maybe talk about why that exists. What are the scenarios that people encounter that they need to do that? And why is this vehicle able to do an emergency lane change and keep the driver in control?
Sure. I guess that kind of goes back to starting with, we do suspension development. We do a lot of quote unquote lift kits, but most of our lift kits are more of a re-engineering of the factory suspension in order to get the tire on. It's not just a taller spring and a, fancy shock. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. And before you go to market, there's a lot of testing that should be done. And most of that relies around stability control, but safety, handling, making sure it doesn't oversteer or understeer, or make sure it understeers properly for a road car. Those are the kinds of things that, we like to make sure they all exist after the vehicle's been modified. And so we're in this awesome position, after almost 30 years of being able to kind of ground up these things. So, we can start, literally when we lay everything out on paper, like in the case of this truck, we had a clean sheet design on the Ram and on the cab chassis and even going into the camper, right? We knew from day one where we needed to end up. So we were able to engineer all that stuff in order to get this really cohesive package. And there is stability control testing. I think one of the first times these guys got the camper on, the first thing we did, I think they were all kind of surprised is, we went out to a back road and kind of set up an informal 60-foot slalom or 60-mile-an-hour slalom.
Sure.
And, going down the road.
That video is crazy. Because, you're hustling that thing. You are, working it to get it to move.
It's violent when you're in the car. I've done those before, and it's violent inside the car.
It's way faster than you think and way harder than you think. And these guys were like, dang, we just built this thing. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Like Dave.
It's like literally the one of one.
One of one. And I'm out there, and I have quite a bit of experience doing that stuff. So, they were surprised. But it's the kind of stuff that's really important. Now, we haven't done the stability control test yet with this thing because they're still dealing with all the weights, but we will. And we'll do some standardized testing just to make sure that, we're giving the customer a solid, safe product. And that's the kind of thing that there's nobody else in the industry. I'm sure there's no other campers for sure that have gone through any kind of testing like that. But it's the kind of stuff that we will do, and, we can tune it and dial it in, right? And we're still doing a lot of tuning. We were out with these guys doing some integration tests, so integrating, their camper to our chassis. We were out in Moab, and we've learned a lot. It's great, but there's always a little bit of room for, even more improvement.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what's always made AEV special is that things are continuously improving.
It's just such like a match made in heaven. So, some people may not know, there was the Tacoma, the BCT that was before that, and everybody loved the camper. It was,
and certainly the concept.
The concept was so cool. You're kind of going for the Sun Raider kind of vibe. You're trying to kind of bring that back, and maybe it was the wrong chassis, but I get where you were going with it. And you were saying last night it was only 8,000 pounds.
That shocked me.
I thought it would have been more than that.
Yeah, that really shocked me. That it came in at 8,000
I remember
pounds.
talking to so many people because I geek out on these kinds of campers and expedition trucks. I was like, wow, the quality, the fit and finish, the thoughtfulness of that camper is absolutely insane. How great would it be if it was on an AEV truck? And that was always the dream. And so many people were talking about that. And then here we are now. You guys have linked up, and this is actually happening. It's a really cool vehicle. So, how did that all come along?
Yeah, one, we're stoked to be here because working with AEV has been absolutely game changing for us. It's helped push my team's engineering probably 10 years in the span of 1 year. So it's been unbelievable.
Talk about rapid prototyping.
Oh my gosh, yeah, what an experience. It's like we stepped into the real world of automotive engineering, and Dave would be like, you want to see how they really do it, and he'd crack the door open and let us peek inside. And my whole team is a bunch of sponges. We absorb that and implement it. But yeah, kind of how it came about is, with those Toyotas, we were doing so much vehicle modification, full back half of chassis on a brand new truck.
Yeah, it had a different axle.
Full custom axle
different
that
front
we were
suspension.
fabricating, full long travel, big brakes, supercharger, big rear brakes. And, I came into the office one evening after working on, stripping paint to cut a brand new chassis down and fabricate it, which is pretty counterintuitive. You start with a brand new, perfectly clean truck, and the first thing you do is start grinding paint.
Yeah.
Pretty strange. Walking into the office and sitting there talking to Nico, who's my co-founder and COO, and we're like, wow, wouldn't it be nice if someone just built the truck for us?
Sure.
He goes, yeah, man, that would be pretty sweet. I was like, dude,
Like you said, it just wasn't scalable.
no, it's too many hours, 400 or 500 hours in truck modification. It's a lot of work and, a lot of responsibility that TruckHouse takes on, and a lot of parts we had to design and fabricate. And, it was very much aftermarket. It wasn't to the AEV, OEM quality. Obviously, we did.
Well, you were doing the best you could.
We did good. I mean, we're good fabricators.
Well, and it's
and
got to
we're
be
good.
so hard to have all of those components work together cohesively, right?
Man.
You've got did you have a diamond axle on the back and total chaos on the front?
Yep.
Like they're all good components on their own, but then you start you're fixing this to fix this to fix this to fix this.
I mean, it took me, not weeks, continuously, but it took me weeks to figure out how to tell the Toyota computer that we had a rear axle in it. Like once you unplug your axle and unplug your locker, it knows everything. So had to do a lot of testing and playing with resistors and getting that to all work, and have locker lights come on with the ARB and all
Did
that.
you lengthen the wheelbase?
Oh yeah.
So this is an interesting question that I just thought of. How close are the dimensions between your wide track Tacoma that has a lengthened wheelbase and where the Ram is today?
Yeah, I want to say the Toyota was about 84 inches wide.
Okay.
Maybe 83 outside of tire to outside of tire, and the Prospector XL is 88.
So,
And then wheelbase. Don't quote me, but it's single digit inches. So it's like.
but what a great choice, though. I mean, when I looked at the Tacoma that you guys built early on, I was like, this thing it looks so good, and I just knew it's like you can't put that much weight on it from a liability standpoint. That was always my fear for you guys. So to be able to go into something with, what do you think, Dave? 300% more headroom, probably, maybe more.
Plenty. Yeah, plenty of headroom and just a well-engineered truck. And really, like what Matt was saying, those guys are putting hundreds of hours of work into a chassis. They don't have the resources to really go through dynamic testing, shock tuning. I mean, they can do what they can do, but
Right.
It's just one of those things where when you start to realize what it really takes to get an OE quality ride and handling characteristics, it's not just like changing valves and the shocks, and it's the fundamental suspension. It's the fundamentals that really matter. Now, the shocks are just like icing on the cake.
Right. You talk a lot about that. Yeah, if the selling point of the suspension that you're buying is the remote reservoir 2.5-inch body, super fancy coating shock, you're probably buying the wrong suspension.
But I like them.
It's the jewelry, right? It's the jewelry for the people who really don't understand it. It's a marketing tactic. It's the truck should have fundamentally good handling. I mean, we do a lot of our initial testing with no shocks. Just all of our frequency tuning, the testing, the initial stuff in the shop. I mean, there's no shocks, and we're kind of shocks, bump stops, sway bars, that stuff. It's really getting the geometry right first.
Yeah, sure.
But getting back to these guys, giving them a Ram chassis to put their ultra lightweight camper on. I mean, this thing's it's made like a Gulfstream jet. It's awesome for that, and then the way they mold it and being able to also incorporate aerodynamics and like all the advantages that have really never been done in the camper industry.
Yeah.
At least nothing I'm aware of. It was kind of this really cool opportunity for us to, help them, and also, secretly, right? Not secretly, we've talked about it plenty, but I wanted a camper.
You wanted
and I was
one,
like, man,
for yourself,
if I can
personally.
help them and, end up with a really good product that's pretty awesome. I didn't feel like it had ever been done really well, like just from the ground up, like you were saying, Matt. It's like a lot of fixes on fixes on fixes.
Yeah.
And it's just never that truly like professional engineered. It's always kind of like there's really good, almost like hobbyist level, but not like really professional.
Well, it's interesting. Even things like the number of campers that we see that have a 3-point mounting system, and that would be entirely appropriate for a Unimog, where that has so much. Its majority of its articulation is in chassis flex. But in the case of the Ram, and this is something that I learned from you, Dave, is like there are these incredible resources in the builder's guides from the manufacturer where they tell you exactly how to mount a box to the back of this thing.
They do.
Pretty much.
And so some of that has to be taken with a grain of salt because they're typically not high articulation,
Sure.
crazy events all day.
Right.
They're more engineered for the street. So but it's a really good guideline. But the way the Ram chassis is connected, or the way the suspension's done, the way the chassis is made, it's not a Unimog.
Yeah.
It doesn't flex the same as a Unimog.
Right.
The Unimog's relatively short generally.
Sure.
Most Unimog,
They are
they're
quite
cab
short.
over. They're pretty even flex from the front of the frame to the back of the frame. The Ram doesn't. I mean, the Ram has this really kind of weird. And I'll say Ram, but I'll say any pickup truck with like leaf springs. Like it's really not flexing in between the leaf springs much, and it's not flexing behind the leaf springs much. It's really flexing in front of the leaf springs to the back of the cab. You get a lot of twist right there, and so you have this like non-proportional, non-linear twist going on where Unimog is, it's just easier to deal with, and it's shorter generally, so you don't have your mounting
And the
points.
speeds are much shorter, and the power is much less.
Everything about it's different.
Significantly different.
Yeah, but you're not trying to grab the camper on either end on a really long truck.
And then another thing that I've noticed is a lot of camper manufacturers will change the suspension. They'll get rid of the leaf spring, which the rear part of a leaf is there for a reason. It helps to support the chassis and the load. So when you remove... Yeah, it spreads the load out across 2 points as opposed to, and also the leverage that goes aft of that point. I would think that's why you see a lot of Gladiators with campers that fail in the frame, where they get into some big event, some big G out or something happens, and there's a weighty camper in the back and it bends the frame.
Yeah. The leaf springs have a big advantage because they do spread the load out to 4 points that are, spread apart by 6-7 feet.
Yeah.
And that's a huge advantage, actually, when you look at the dynamics and the fatigue on a frame.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just have, let's say, a coil spring or an air spring or whatever, and it's just driving right up into the frame directly from the axle.
Yeah.
And especially if you combine that with mounting the camper on either ends of the frame, and now right in the middle of that beam, you put all the load right in one place.
Right.
You end up with some really interesting dynamic challenges, we'll say.
And usually even the shocks are pretty close to the mounting point of the spring. So like it's all fairly concentrated at that one
They
spot.
are, and if it's designed right, those loads from the shocks should be relatively low in terms of beaming. But, if you're essentially grabbing a beam on either end with the camper, and then you're right in the middle, you're pushing up with the spring loads all the time.
Sure.
You're going to have some beaming in the frame, and you're going to have a bunch of problems. And also, when, like Matt and I talked early on, it was kind of trying to decide how we're going to configure this thing, what was the best for them. And I think to their surprise, I suggested leaf springs. And, that's not what the camper industry's typically doing. But when we started talking about failure modes, being in the Arctic, being out in the middle of nowhere, you can't have a failure. And it was just the strongest, simplest, and ironically, best handling.
Yeah, it was actually something that I thought was a little sus. I mean, like, I've got a different camper. I've got an earth roamer. It's got air suspension. And, there's this idea that because it's modified from the factory, it's therefore better. and I was like really surprised with how well the leaf springs rode.
Oh yeah, super
Like I
good.
thought it was going to be jarring, you know, because you think like you think of air, you know, you can adjust the, you know, the height, whatever, that it's somehow softer, but it's
you have to really think how much design engineering and R&D really goes into those leaf springs and front coils from Ram to have a small company that builds airbags or builds hydraulic suspension. You know, to think that they have more knowledge and experience than the OEs at Ram is pretty wild. And then, you know, to Dave's point, it's all the pickups, cab chassis want you to load the frame evenly. That's how it's designed. That's why the frame rails are flat.
I mean, you're really like the first company that I have seen that has come along where, you know, you're actually innovating beyond what the industry is currently doing. Like, you know, this isn't to like poo-poo on the 3-point mounting system, but like that's premium in the space still, you know, like that's what the customer recognizes as being the solution. That's what they have been told.
And those things just take time.
In most cases it works, right? But it really takes that kind of partnership that you guys have, you know, and bringing AEV in to take that to the next level. Because these are, you know, one of the things that stood out from our conversations is that, you know, there's camper companies and then there's, you know, vehicle companies, right? And like the camper companies are generally not, you know, they're just relying on other suppliers or hodgepodge of suppliers or whatever. Like it hasn't really been like holistically integrated before. And that's what like really stands out to me on the TruckHouse.
Yeah, and you know, with Dave's recommendation was to do, you know, what we call a rail-on-rail system, so that the camper is evenly loading the chassis. That has its own unique design challenges. I was instantly against it because it's actually hard. You see them on the big man expedition vehicles. They do a lot of rail-on-rail. They have to build a giant steel subframe that sits on the chassis that raises center of gravity. That adds a lot of weight. And we didn't want to add weight. We didn't want to add height. And then they're notoriously loud because you usually have...
They bang around.
They bang around.
Sure. That's
because
true.
they usually have
true.
some type of hard plastic or steel.
Yeah.
Just steel on steel. They're really loud and clunky. And they actually, you know, have the ability to still put torsional forces into the frame if it's rigid mounted in the rear. So initially I said, I don't think you're right, Dave. That sounds really challenging. I don't think we're going to be able to hit, you know, the weight numbers we want. And like many things Dave's told me, I thought about it and our team thought about it. And, you know, a couple weeks later I call him, I go, I think you're right. I think we can't build a steel frame. I think we need to build a basically integrated carbon subframe. We can't build an 800-pound steel structure that's 4 to 6 inches tall and still hit the design requirements we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, you took advantage of the carbon, the strength of the carbon.
We build our own boxes in-house, and so we can add any type of carbon, any amount of carbon, different weaves, different, you know, weaves, structures, reinforcements in different areas to accomplish what we're trying to do. So our floor has an extra 200 pounds of dry raw carbon in it, which is, you know, supplementing that 800-pound steel frame. And then, you know, to deal with the noise, we cast our own polyurethane isolators. It's the full length of the frame. It's pretty.
How does one cast your own polyurethane isolator?
Yeah.
Like, do you have a tool?
We built our own tool.
Nice.
Yeah, we built our own tool.
And then
tools,
an injection molding machine that.
It's a poured cast process,
Oh, okay.
pouring cast
Yeah, sure.
process,
Yeah, cool,
and
though.
the
That's cool.
two different tools, and
That's cool.
It really makes a huge difference, and ends up for, you know, what Ram wants, evenly loaded, but also allows the 12 or so degrees of twist we see from the chassis to be happy.
I will say though, just in the effort of being as unbiased as we can be, despite how much we like this truck, the advantage of those air suspensions are self-leveling.
Oh,
so,
yeah,
and that's the
really
reason
nice.
why companies put them on. And I've had scenarios like with earth roamers, like in, you know, Nicaragua, where we're like bottoming the thing out to fit underneath, you know, a wire going over the road or whatever. So they do have their place.
Yeah.
I just wonder, like, I think that there are certainly some convenient, like it's a big convenience boost. But I think if I'm trying to drive truly remote or around the world, I would just bring along some blocks that I could level the truck with, or be a little
it's
more mindful.
simpler. I mean,
I personally think that, saying that the air ride is for self-leveling is just part of a marketing tactic. It does have that as a key benefit, but it's also needed because those vehicles are so heavy.
Yeah.
They need to do something because the factory leaf spring setup isn't necessarily happy underneath that vehicle.
Yeah.
So you can spin it by saying, oh, but now it self-levels.
It's not to say that it's not reliable. Like,
People use them every day
I have
to
a lot
level
of
their
miles
truck.
on my Earth Roamer, and that system
Yeah, the Kelderman is pretty reliable.
has not had any faults for me. But you do. It's like this failure mode of the truck house that is so appealing because there are so few things that can fail. It is inherently simpler. There's definitely places where I go and I'm like, oh man, if I carry a spare airbag, I carry a spare air compressor, I carry spare air fittings, spare caps that have like little Schrader valves, so I could, if the main compressor went out, I could get myself home. But I have to think of these things, right? And I think, we were talking a lot about kind of your background in the marine industry, growing up in that with your dad owning like a boatyard in Sausalito. Like, the thing that stuck out is, when you learned how to do wiring, when your dad taught you how to do that, the thing that he kind of said to you was, you have to do it right, because if this catches on fire, like there's now a boat on fire 20 miles offshore.
Or 200 miles or 2,000 miles.
Yeah, like people, like there's a high chance that they would die,
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting, I'd love to talk about like your background on, like in the marine space, because there are a lot of similarities between these expedition campers and the marine world. Like, at breakfast we're talking, there's bad boats and there's really good boats. There's guys that are doing things the way that you are in the marine space too, and then there's guys that are, Jayco rental Class C, Cruise America quality.
Right.
Those things serve their purpose, right?
Yeah, you're just not going to take them over El Camino del Diablo or something.
Yeah.
Well, you could try.
Yeah, no, it's super fortunate that my dad runs a little small shipyard in Sausalito, and grew up working there in summers through high school and college, and got kind of an experience in every aspect of the yard. Started my first summer there sanding bottoms, and got to work with each kind of crew each summer. So learned woodworking, metalworking, paint, wiring, fiberglass work, and some of the high-end yachts you go into are so awe-inspiring. You walk in and it's so craftsmanship driven. It's so beautiful. I was instantly inspired by those. And you go into a white box RV and it's pretty underwhelming, but it all has that mindset of intention and thought of it being out in open ocean, and how dangerous it can become if something isn't well thought out or doesn't have some redundancies. And that whole world kind of tied right in with Dave. Dave's always thinking about failure modes, always thinking about if this breaks or when this breaks, what is going to happen, how is the customer going to handle that. And so there's some obvious synergies there. And Dave's biggest fear on earth is corrosion, and that's pretty common in the marine industry as well. So we had a lot to bond over, just from my background.
One of the things you mentioned yesterday that I thought was really cool is that you intend to have most of the interior, layout, structure, shape as part of a mold as well. And I have seen that be very successful in other campers. So like Earth Cruiser, who doesn't sell campers in the U.S. anymore, but they did that. They molded just like on my Catalina, like all of my galley and the bathroom and everything. It's all molded into, and none of that stuff ever gives me any trouble. It never. There is nothing to rattle
it's
loose.
Just inherently simpler, and then you're adding to a structure.
Yeah. And is that part of what gives the camper its structure? Is that interior?
It certainly adds to it.
Yeah.
It's not necessary.
And is that carbon as well?
It's fiberglass.
I would think so. Yeah, I was going to just ask about that.
Yeah, and it could be. You can add carbon where fiberglass is pretty interchangeably. It's
it just cost.
Yeah, it costs exactly.
Yeah, sure.
But what we do unique in the molded cabinet space is it's a cord vacuum infused cabinet. So it's not a chopper gun hand laid fiberglass part. It's actually foam cord and infused. So it does act as structural ribbing or bulkheads to the shell itself.
Yeah.
But because the shell is, nominal thickness of 2-inch carbon infused, it really doesn't need any additional strength.
Yeah.
But really the benefit there is we're saving a bunch of weight, and then we're not just screwing cabinets to the wall that are going to eventually vibrate loose when you're really using these vehicles on washboard roads.
Right.
It's actually structurally bonded into the carbon shell itself. So you grab the galley and you pull, you shake the whole vehicle. It's never going to come off.
That's pretty amazing.
And we have, since you guys have been in the pre-production model with us, we have finished those molds. We built that tooling in-house. We have built the parts for production. It cuts down on so many pieces of cabinetry. The truck you're in was a fiberglass interior. It was just hand built.
Yeah, sure.
Now that we have it molded, we're able to, increase
I
production.
mean, the camper's great. Like it's
I like the
crazy
layout, yeah.
cool. Like, you were describing to me kind of like the concept of like the carbon monocoque and how that works, and like all these different, like the different weaves that you're using. I mean, it is like, this is complex stuff.
Oh my goodness. I mean, we could have
Like it's like, to me, I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, like this is the stuff that, you see in race cars, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a 3-hour podcast on just the shell itself.
Yeah.
There's so many hours of thought, so many hours
Well, you
of
said
design.
200 hours. So maybe explain to us, like, it's a carbon monocoque, and then it's sandwiched with foam in the middle. I mean, you were saying that there's 200 hours of CNC time just on the foam. Like, I know, like, from my camper, they kind of, it has some balsa core to it, and then it has some insulation, but they're just doing that on like the flat surfaces, right? Where, I mean, you were showing me parts today where, like on the high pressure, like the hyperfoils that you guys have that reduce that frontal area of the camper. We'll talk about that more with kind of the driving impressions. But I mean, even that itself has a foam core to it. I mean, it's this crazy complex, like there's no like flat line on this camper.
On the whole
I mean,
thing.
You look at it and it is insanely detailed, complex. And then, I'd love to know, or the listeners, I'm sure, would love to know more about kind of that just the process of how that's made, because it's completely different.
Yeah.
And why is it so? I mean, help people understand why it's so expensive too. Like I don't think people know how much carbon costs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, going from the BCT to this Ram BCR, we really heightened our level of automotive surfacing with help from Dave. Really want this thing to look intentional. There's no flat panels on any OE vehicle. Yeah. I can't say that as well anymore because of the Cybertruck, but besides that, there's no flat surfaces. And they're not just developed in simple, general CAD modeling software. It's actually automotive surfacing software. And so there's thousands of hours in just the exterior surface design of that shell before molds are even, designed off of that surface and built. But, curves
it just makes everything look, once you really spend time looking at this BCR, and it was so cool. Like, we had it in my garage last night, and normally my earth roamer is parked in there. And
it was much smaller.
Yeah.
You could definitely see the size difference.
You crack a beer and it's just like, for me, that was like literally my home environment. So you start to notice all these different details where, like, I'm not saying that the earth roamer is bad looking. I mean, I love my truck, but it's flat panel, rounded surface into flat panel into rounded surface. Like it's not, I mean, it's still better than 99% of what is out there, but this is so complex and it's hard. Like, I really encourage people, if you're looking at this stuff, you've got to look at this thing, because it's,
seeing it in person is actually pretty important.
It's like the first time you saw a supercar with like aero on it, right? And then you look to your left and there was like a Mustang Fox body, right? Like everything. I mean, hey, Fox bodies are kind of cool, but like everything now to me like starts looking like a Fox body. Like, it's very basic, and then you have like an Aston Martin Valkyrie next to it, and like there's actual like aerodynamic consideration that has gone into this. Like, Dave, you were explaining it at breakfast how, like with these high pressure foils, how it reduces there's a word you're using where it kind of cavitates and then shifts to the side. And as you're describing to me, like, well, that's what I feel when the car is kind of, the camper is moving side to side, like it's kind of, almost getting like turbulence.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's turbulence down the side of the vehicle. You get a high pressure building up in front, and then it tends to spill off one side, and then it builds up and spills off the other side. It kind of gets into a beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I was explaining. That's like if you put the rear window down on your truck, you'll hear that beat off the mirrors, the turbulence coming off the mirrors.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it sounds like a Huey.
Yeah.
And that actually is a huge deal. When you drive the truck, you can feel it.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't feel like, if you put a Wrangler with a rooftop tin on it, it feels like a parachute. This thing,
Did not feel
you
that
let
way.
off the gas and it just coasts down like it just doesn't drive like as a camper on it. And it's subtle, and same with all the curvature. It's all subtle, but it's really, when you start looking at it, it's really defined.
Yeah.
And we had an interesting experience when we unveiled our regular cab silver truck at the Arizona Expo last year. People kept coming up and going, "It's beautiful.
It's
beautiful."
really good
And they
looking.
kept saying beautiful. And I had never experienced that. Yes, our Toyota was, well designed and it was a good looking rig, but people were like, "Wow, that's badass." Or like,
Yeah.
"It looks like you guys did a really nice job."
Yeah.
The word that just kept coming was beautiful. And
Well,
I think
art.
that's really
art.
unique in this space.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, TruckHouse's ethos is we want to build something that is beautiful, but the design and engineering has to go hand in hand. So we're not just designing it to look good. Like, it's engineered as well as designed the whole way through. And it's pretty apparent when you start using the thing.
It's so different. Like, remember last night we were talking, like, everybody thinks they could land a plane if they had to. It's like everybody thinks they could design a camper. I mean, there's a lot of people that do, they do the foam core panels with the extrusions and stuff. And that, it works, like it's fine. But like you walk up to this and you're like, I could not land that plane. Like, I could not, I could not design that. Like, it is,
No.
not only does it match the styling of the truck, and like, I think that like the bumper that's on these trucks is like the sexiest aftermarket like bumper you could get, and like that like level of quality and like vibe that I get of geeking out on like the AEV parts, like that kind of translates into the camper, and it's just better. In the way that like the AEV bumper and the Ram, like you look at that and then you look at other stuff that is like cardboard aided design, like it's a dude fabbing up plate steel and
Yeah,
maybe
they're
adding a
doing
curve
their
or something.
best.
They're
Yeah.
doing their best, right?
Yeah.
But it's like it is like that level of it's just that next level, and I think that that's really cool.
I mean, we certainly have drank the AUV Kool-Aid. I mean,
Well, I've been drinking it for years.
Hanging out with Dave is, we've really tried to adopt their philosophies, and I mean, he can speak to it better than myself, but surfacing is one of the most complex forms of design. Mechanical design is challenging and has its own, inherent challenges, but to truly automotive surface something is a unique skill. It's not just chamfers and radiuses. I mean, you can speak to it more than I can, Dave.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. I mean, it was a super fun project, right? Because these guys trusted us to, take their ideas. They gave us, we need these dimensions. This is what we're thinking. They gave us a surface, and and we're like, okay, well, let us clean it up. And we said clean it up, but we did some pretty major changes, and some of it was pretty uncomfortable for Matt.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
He like to their credit, they always come back. They'll say no, and then they'll go back and think about it, and then normally come back and be like, okay, we like that idea. And so, like, getting rid of the front windows was a big thing. Like, expedition campers, if you had AI design you an expedition camper, it's going to have 2 windows on the front.
Yeah.
And I hate that because I'm like, that is a huge problem for me, like in Alaska. You're right, driving on the
Stone.
I've
Takes one
got-
stone.
I've got a good story about
Just
that.
takes one stone.
So, and I'll get into why, some of Dave's, like he said, we provided them a surface, and Dave was like, hey, let us clean it up. Let us bring it to that OE level. We do some surfacing in-house, but Dave does real surfacing in-house. So obviously, we dropped our egos immediately and said, yes, we would love some help. That sounds amazing. But the front window story is funny because we had the camper, really close to being finished before Dave's guys helped us smooth it out and make it a bit more beautiful. And we had front windows designed in it, like our previous model. Dave calls me and goes, we got to get rid of the front windows. And I go, no. and he goes, no, we need to. They're going to break. And I'm all, dude, I have 8 trucks on the road right now, 250,000 miles amongst them cumulatively. No window has broken. Like, I like them. It makes the bed feel bigger. We're keeping it, and Dave goes, they're going to break. And that means the front surface of the vehicle has to be flat for the windows to fit. And I go, yep, that's part of the, that's a design constraint, man. We're married to it. He goes, all right, Matt, well, think about it. I hung up with Dave. 30 minutes later, I get a phone call from a customer who's here in Arizona on a road trip. Rock had broken front window.
Dave was like,
no.
got his little Red Rider out.
I'm not even making that up. It was literally
8 pumps.
It was literally the same day. And then
Yeah.
I triaged that with the customer and realized like that failure mode is a trip ender.
Yeah.
Say you have a trip plan with your family to go up to Alaska and you make it to Oregon and break a window.
Yeah.
Those windows, the glass comes from the Netherlands. Like
Did I tell
you're
you-
turning around.
Did I tell you about the time in Hyder I had a window blow off of my truck? I was in panic, right? I mean, like the window was gone, like not broken, gone. The bugs were so bad it flew off, and like we stopped by to the side of the road to take a piss or something, and then I'm like peeing on the tire, and I look up and oh my God, the window's gone, and this is the worst bugs I've ever experienced in my life. And it was sitting on the side of the road in a bed of grass, perfectly undamaged.
What?
Yeah, and just outside of Stewart, BC, like when you're going to Hyder.
Oh, that was a win.
I get the thing with the windows, but those windows up front are actually a pain in the ass when you spend time with them because you sleep north-south in the vehicle, right? And then like they are nice for bringing air kind of over you. You turn the fan
that's the
on,
upside.
and
That's
then
the
it
upside.
brings air. But the thing is that your pillows then sit up against it, right? So not only do you have like this kind of surface that is there's not a lot of transfer thermally, but it is colder. But imagine having your screen there, and then your pillow pushes the screen out.
Yeah.
Bugs get in, stuff gets in. Like they're actually always blocked.
Yeah,
Like
and they catch a lot of bugs going down the road.
Yeah.
And when Dave was originally saying we got to get rid of him, he was really leaning on failure mode, and that obviously was realized 30 minutes after I hung up with him.
Yeah.
But I know in the back of his mind the whole time he was saying we can look different, we can add curvature, we can be aerodynamic if we get rid of this flat front end. And when I called him back, this was probably the fastest time I had ever said no, Dave, and then called him right back. Usually it takes me about 2 weeks to do some mental gymnastics and get my team involved and realize what Dave's trying to get across. Dave likes to give us advice without telling us the whole story. It's almost like a little test, I think. I don't know if he'll admit it, but he's like, I wonder if these guys are smart enough to figure out what I really mean.
It's difference between teaching someone to fish and giving them a fish, right? So it's a huge difference.
Oh,
So there's got to be something though that you told Dave F no, and you still say F no. There's got to be something you haven't changed.
I mean, he said swing out tire carriers are the hardest thing to design.
Yeah.
And I said, I want a tailgate for our gearbox. The tire has to move. And he said, it's one of the hardest things we've ever designed at AEV, the Wrangler swing out, which is a phenomenal design. He can talk more about it than me, but it's got some, cam action. It pulls really tight. And a lot of swing outs have one pivot point down low. The tire is heavy. It's got a lot of leverage.
You always
shakes.
see them rattling. Like you go down corrugations, and it's just moving.
And as Dave says, if it moves, it will break. It's not if, it's just when. It might be 50,000 miles, might be 20,000 miles, might be 100,000 miles. But even if you lay a beautiful weld, it's going to eventually break.
Someone's going to pay for it when it goes through a school bus window.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. And so I said, no, Dave, we're having a swing out. And he said, well, you better be really intentional about the design. And, we said we're going to move to 2 pivots. We're going to mount it to the carbon fiber box since we have, the ability to add reinforcement and hard points. And, he said that's a good idea. And he let us get down the path a bit. And then we, used him as an advisor and saw what he thought. And he helped us come up with a wrist plate design in the middle. It's got big forged chromoly Heim joints with stainless steel uniballs and polyurethane caps that you can preload. And it's got stainless steel plates that detent so it stops and doesn't swing out, and we designed and got some of Dave's input, and he kind of finally was like, wow, like I sign off on this, you guys should build it and see if it works. And we built it, and it's the best swing out design I've ever seen in my life. I mean, what do you think, Dave?
Yeah, it's perfect for the camper.
Yeah, it's
it
really functional.
fits the bill, and it was a challenge. none of it had been done before. It wasn't the easy way to do things.
Yeah.
But that was one thing. Yeah, the rear door. I was trying to encourage Matt, like, hey, the rear door is really going to cause a lot of problems, and they were in a rush too. So it was kind of like trying to weigh them getting into their molds schedule at the time and doing all this stuff. But, that was one thing. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, it was pretty back and forth on a lot of stuff. But like the front windows,
But that's got to be fun for you.
It is. I mean, and,
To like
I
get
love
the,
this stuff.
even the
right?
pushback the other direction of like makes you think about it. Like, oh, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, they had good reasoning,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And it was like, okay, that's a solid reason,
Yeah,
right? As
sure.
long as you can answer a question, if I ask somebody a question, as long as they can answer it with a good answer, then that's generally good enough for me.
Sure.
If it's like, oh, well, we just thought it looked cool, that's the wrong answer, right?
I don't think we've ever done anything
No.
like that. I think that's why Dave, enjoys helping us and working with us. Is my whole team is intentional. There's thought behind every decision, and there's lots of whiteboards and lots of pros and cons lists.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've known Dave for almost 20 years now. In fact, it is almost exactly 20 years. And in all of that time, I've never had him say, you know what, these guys are really sharp, like about anyone else ever. And he said that about you guys on pretty early on in the process. Like we were just chatting about you guys and what you were doing. And he's like, these guys are really, and they're working hard. They're trying. They're really good, really sharp. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, it was pretty apparent with their Toyota camper
Yeah,
when
yeah.
I first saw it.
Yeah.
They were doing something. And it's funny you say that. Like we have known each other a long time. We've been on a lot of trips.
Yep.
And my whole ethos is like, try not to bring a toolkit, right?
Yeah.
Like if you design it right, you don't really need to. And
We never have.
How many times have we broken out a wrench?
Never.
Never, right? And that's what I was trying to, work with these guys and like get them into that. Yeah, you might give up some marketing prowess.
Yeah.
In terms of like going simple, but simple's better. Thinking about those windows, like if your side window broke out, okay, you can fix that with some cardboard and plastic
Your
bags
front
and
one,
duct
you're
tape.
screwed.
But if you put a front one out, it's a problem.
Big
right?
problem.
Especially in bugs, in snow and ice,
Right.
anywhere. I mean, it's your bedding. It could be a real
Yeah.
annoyance. At best, it's an annoyance, and at worst, it's a real problem.
Sure.
And then, once we remove those front windows and we're able to add that beautiful sweeping curve in the front and those hyperfoils, which stand for high pressure reduction airfoils, which are, patent pending, it kind of just elevated the rest of the build as well. We could add more curvature in other places and make it kind of blend and be beautiful. Like
And that's
people are
how
saying.
it drives so good. I mean, that was,
What were some of your, like, what's your top 3 impressions of driving it? 'Cause you have a lot of time in other campers.
It just really drives like a pickup. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you forget the campers.
I'm
back
not
there.
trying to bag on what I mean, I have an earth roamer. I love my earth roamer. Like there's some things that I like. I love the space and the size of it. But, before I even get into the driving dynamics of it, the whole ethos of this car, like where it's innovative in generality is that it's light.
Yeah.
Right. So the worst thing about all of these trucks are the tires. Like, man, like it's hard to, I mean, I guess I did put into words in a recent story how bad these tires are. They're pretty durable on when you're off road. These Continental MPT tires are basically the only option. There's a Michelin, there's a Turkish company, there's a Goodyear, but the Continental MPT is pretty much the option.
And they look great.
They look great, but they're like, unless you go to a tire that's like the 43 or 44 inch tall tire, they're limited to 68 mile an hour.
Yeah.
That sucks, man. Like where we were driving yesterday, we were in Phoenix, we were at Auto Car Club for their bagels and bullshit, and then we drove up to Prescott, and I drive that road all the time. I've driven it, I've had 2 Prospectors, I've driven it in both of those trucks. I drive it in sports. I mean, we took a 911 down it. Like, I've driven all kinds of stuff down this road. I know it. And I was able to drive the TruckHouse in the way that I would have driven like a Prospector on it. Like, and it was just great because it's so light, because you're on regular tires. You're on an F-rated BF Goodrich HD tire, and that is actually the game changer, right? Like, the more you add to these vehicles, the more complexity, the more weight you add, it puts you outside of the window of a normal tire. I mean, I know like
a normal driving experience.
I'm not saying a 40 is like a normal tire, but like you can get this tire from any BF Goodrich dealer, right? Like a Continental NPT, you're ordering it from some commercial tire supply.
Then get it mounted.
They may have
That's
it.
the problem, is getting it mounted.
That's the crazy thing. I mean, I had to remove the inner beadlocks on my Hutchinson wheels because they just end up kind of distorting from heat over time, and then you cannot balance these things. So, like, it was there's so many pain points, I think, that have been removed with the TruckHouse, and that was what was so impressive to me. Like, it is, like, truthfully, the Earth Roamer has been it's the vehicle I've owned the longest in my life. It's the vehicle I've taken the most places. I love it, but this is the only thing that actually has me like, like maybe the Earth Roamer was the best option. I don't know if it is anymore. And it's hard once you realize that there's this kind of meteoric shift in concept. Like it's a little bit smaller, but I can take it more places. I mean, like, you guys took it on like Hell's Revenge and Poison Spider. Like that's
yeah, it's legit.
like insane.
Yeah. I mean, I took the Quartermaster with the Scout on Hell's Revenge, and I was like, ooh.
But like with the weight of like the Earth Roamer, like I've literally gone down stuff where I have sank into the ground.
Oh yeah.
Like I was so thankful to have 2 inches. I mean, I blew my rear wing.
Yeah, it was the mantle of the earth that actually stopped
Like
you.
it just like it, because it's 20,000 pounds. Like
Yeah,
it's harder to accelerate 20,000 pounds. It's harder to stop 20,000 pounds. Putting 20,000 pounds through a turn is so much harder. Where with the TruckHouse, it was so easy. Like, you know, nearly anyone could drive. We were talking about this on the way in. Like, nearly anyone could drive a TruckHouse. Where I like even friends of mine that I know can drive, I do not let them drive the Earth Roamer. Like, because I'm, you know, going up the grade from Phoenix, I am limited by temperatures on that vehicle, right? I don't like it.
Tire temp.
Well, tire temperature.
Speed,
I mean, these tires.
engine temp.
Yeah. Just on engine oil and engine coolant temperature. Now, I mean, I've even done like a different grill to have more airflow. I've done like a bulletproof diesel oil cooler. I've done
Took the lights off.
Bigger oil pan. I've taken the lights off. And, you know, I was kind of with Dave in the car. I'm like, this is when I have to start managing temperatures, and I'm 20% through the climb. And then from there, you know, as soon as that fan kicks on in the Ford 67, which it basically has to run, I mean, it's something like it uses 40 horsepower to operate this fan. So then you're like, you're actually just getting slower and slower and slower and slower to the point where, like, I end up just going 45 mile an hour up this hill. Like, there was traffic, and that's 45 mile an hour, and you're hoping that you have a clean run. You're just going to park behind a semi, and you just kind of go. You cannot pass that truck because you don't have, like, I guess I'd call it the thermal capacity to, I mean, maybe the truck has the power to go faster, but it's too hot. You know, I already blew an engine once. I'm not doing it again. I'm very conservative with it, and I was doing 85 in the TruckHouse. Like, I mean, that thing.
And a lot of it was you had one hand on the wheel. You were relaxed. We're chatting. Your shoulders were relaxed. You had even breathing. Like, I always know when people are getting, or when the vehicle is feeling unsafe. Both hands are on the wheels. Their grip increases. Their shoulders start to tense. Their traps start to pull up. They stop talking, or they're not talking much. And none of that was happening with you. So
yeah, I mean,
and you're a good driver to begin with, but still,
I know how to drive these vehicles, and it was so easy.
Yeah.
You know, putting it, like, I think it was 212 was maybe the max coolant temp that we hit. I mean, the truck didn't really give a shit. I mean, that is
didn't care.
Nothing,
Yeah.
right? You know, this is to be fair, my truck is a 2011. But that engine and driveline and suspension was the same until 2020. I mean, the suspension's the same as well. And that's the other thing is the suspension on the TruckHouse. Yes, it's simpler. No, it does not have leveling. But you spend a lot of time on the road getting to where you're going to camp. Like for me, the trade-off of carrying some leveling blocks is like 5,000% worth it for just being able to drive a normal car. Like, you know, like Laura will drive the Earth Roamer. She's a good driver. She has a lot of experience. She did a lot of the driving on the Dempster Highway and everything. She's crossed the Simpson Desert. No disrespect, but she doesn't really feel comfortable. I know that she would take this truck out on her own with her friends. You know, she would not take the Earth Roamer out on her own.
That was, like, I'll say, you know, through this whole cooperation with the TruckHouse guys, it's the best thing we've had is Matt and I were able to look at this calculus equation, right, where we're coming up with the ultimate or the optimal solution, right?
Yeah.
So that was what wheelbase, what chassis, which engine, how we're going to drive it. You know, in the Western U.S., if you can't do 85, I mean, drives get really long.
Sucks, dude.
Mileage, aerodynamics, fuel, range, you know, failure modes. We were able to take, like, you know, probably 100 variables and solve for the optimal solution. And that's why it's on the wheelbase it is. It's why it is a little smaller. It's because that's actually turns out that's as big as you can go and still be optimal and do trails like Poison Spider.
Yeah.
I mean, do I expect any of Matt's customers to go out and do Poison Spider? Probably not. I mean, it's gotten really chewed up lately, you know. I mean, Hell's Revenge is not that hard, but on a, you know, in a
camper,
big
it's legit.
expedition camper,
It's legit.
it's pretty legit.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't
like it's not
expect
small.
people to do
Like,
that.
I mean, it's, what do we say? It's probably 3 or 4 feet shorter than my Roamer in the garage.
I don't.
It's about 5.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And you guys have, you know,
And much narrower.
your truck has that garage, so I'd like to get a measurement from the bed to the back of the
Yeah.
living space. I don't think it's that much different.
It just doesn't, you know, it doesn't feel that different because there's the dinette on the back with these huge windows. And, you know, for my camper and a lot of campers, there's storage back there, so it feels a little more closed off. I mean, I love my camper. I'm not ragging on it. But this does, the theme is that it does more with less. And what it is all higher quality. Like, you were walking me through the fact that the camper can come off in about 40 minutes. Like, that's crazy. Like, Matt showed me all the plugs that are on the back of it that, I mean, in 30 seconds, you can disconnect all the electronics.
Yeah.
That was interesting too when you talked about how it charges the batteries. So that the Ram has 2 alternators, and you guys have a 48-volt alternator that charges the camper batteries while you're driving. So it was really interesting to me that you're not touching any of the factory truck systems, which again comes back to reliability. You're not tapping into the coolant of the truck, for example.
Yeah, like that's why my freaking motor blew up because I mean, they spec'd a good hose. It was a Continental hose. It was just old and it got hot and it blew up.
And
it
that
was
was a choice.
$30,000.
Yeah.
Like-
That's a choice that we had to talk about, and that's part of that optimal solution is what are
Yeah.
you willing to give up for the ultimate in reliability and simplicity and,
Right.
and actually, if you're going to use it, actually use it, not just go to ski area parking lots, you know. This is what we feel is the kind of the optimal solution.
And it's so helpful for us to have Dave's 30 years of experience, because while we were penciling out, which we do to every single option in this, you know, as Dave says, calculus equation, it's do we hook up the hydronic heating system to the factory coolant? And I'm so fortunate that I can call Dave and say, have you ever had a cold start issue? Do we need to do this? And Dave goes, nope, I've had the trucks
And you have so
negative
much power.
I've
Yeah,
had the-
just
but
plug the block heater into the camper.
Yeah, and Dave,
I mean, there's so much power in that truck.
yeah, and Dave says no, never had a problem. You know, the problem if we do hook the hydronic heat system up is it's longer coolant runs. We're messing with, you know, factory cooling system. It's like maybe keep the Ram and keep the camper. And if,
Yeah,
if the
smart.
Ram needs to be serviced, it's way easier for Ram. They're not looking at us saying we caused the problem. It's just more serviceable, more reliable, and
Yep.
the ultimate goal is for people to go camping. A lot of these big, you know, vehicles are in the shop a lot. They're getting worked on. They have problems. The dealer won't touch them because they're so heavily modified. And
Or they're just too heavy for their lifts
I mean,
or
just
whatever
finding
else.
a lift for it, like finding somebody that services the goddamn tires. Like I'm passionate about these tires. Like it is the worst part of ownership. Like why would I consider a truck house? because I don't have to deal with those tires. Like I'm getting heated, I'm getting angry because like
Should we talk about the Bronco?
Yeah, like it's like me with the Bronco. Like they look cool and everything, but like, I mean, you know, you have like a 200+ pound wheel and tire. Like
They're military wheels and they're military tires. They're designed for a different use,
but again,
for sure.
all of that stuff adds up. It's like, well, if you want more space and you want the wine rack and you want the air suspension and you want the, you know, the tile backsplash and all, I mean, all these things that are actually like really nice about the Earth Roamer and trucks that are like that. But then you get pushed into those tires, and I can't like if anybody just listens to one thing, it's that like it's light, so you can use a more appropriate tire that is just more realistic.
Yeah, we're right at 13,000 pounds for the.
So that's 7,000 pounds less than your Earth Roamer, probably.
Yeah, 6,000 or 7,000 pounds, I'd say.
But and one of those, you know, going back to that calculus equation was, hey, you know, we developed this BF Goodrich tire with BF Goodrich for the Prospector XL. It's a load range F. You know, what do we need to do to run this tire? And that was that was one of those fundamental things right off the bat was, hey, let's try and keep this a normal tire for normal people.
Yeah,
And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
That we've done so much engineering and we manufacture all the shells in house, and that's not an easy shell to build. You know, going back to the
Because it's easy to overload the rear tires.
oh goodness,
Yeah.
Super easy, especially you're converting, you know, to a super single.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
You know, if you go back to that thing where, hey, ask me a question and I'll give you an answer on every single thing, and you say, why is it narrower than the competition? You know, normal campers are pretty much the road legal limit, 8'5".
That's
or
right.
8'6".
That's right.
You know, ours is narrower, and the reason is, you know, it comes down to wheel offset and axle durability. I mean, there's a 1,000 reasons why.
being able to park in a normal parking spot, being able to fit on a trail.
yeah. Like when you go to the
Mirrors.
5500 chassis with like the bigger.
Bridges. I mean, think about. I mean, there's a lot that comes into play. I mean, I guess to kind of wrap up the driving impressions section. Yesterday, when I had the chance to drive the vehicle, my initial impression was I don't feel. You could hear a little bit from the camper, but I don't feel the camper on the truck. It drives like a PXL. It accelerates properly. It stops properly. It turns properly. So I think that safety and driver confidence is going to be in a whole nother class than most of the other campers on the market. And it's also what drives a lot of people to something like a Sprinter, because they drive like a car. They give people a lot of confidence going down the road, as long as you don't over-modify them or overlift them. So vans like the Sprinters have become incredibly popular for that reason, because people get behind the wheel and they're like, oh yeah, I feel like I could drive across the country in this thing. So this is the first like proper around the world expedition camper that I have driven that I think meets that objective, where the average driver will feel comfortable and confident. They'll have like low driver fatigue. They can switch back and forth with their partner. Everybody feels like they can participate, and they don't feel like they're kind of on the hairy edge. Some of those campers, once you get them going fast, like most of them, if you run them around 60, 65, you can kind of do that all day long, but you just don't get anywhere in the U.S. at that speed.
And that's the key in the U.S., right? So we talked about it before. The U.S. is unique, and it's one of the few places in the world, maybe honestly one of the only places in the world, where you can drive at 80, 85 miles an hour for hours on end.
Yeah, it's the only place I can think, because they won't let you do that in Australia. It's illegal.
Yeah, and in Canada, you know, you're at 62. You know, Mexico, you're around 60. I mean, almost everywhere in the world, you're really about 60. And then you get into the, you know, the mileage of this thing and the range. If you keep this thing at 60, 62, you're going to be in the 16 mile per gallon range.
And we 72 gallons of fuel.
Yeah, didn't we calculate that?
Factory fuel tanks.
Calculated that around 1,300 miles of range.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
I would say even, you know, in the U.S. you're going to have 1,000-mile range even at high speed.
Yeah, sure.
Which was, you know, we've talked about that too. That's critical, and just safety, right?
Yeah.
Just like, you know, maybe it's safety, maybe it's vehicle safety in a way. Like, oh, this, you know, if you don't have to get gas where you might not want to, right? That this place doesn't look like they've changed their diesel fuel in a long time or their filters. I'm going to skip and go
or
to
it's
the
really
next one.
expensive or whatever.
And
right?
also-
Like,
Or you're just trying to get out of town. I mean, like just a couple months ago in Florida, like people
Right.
could not get out of Florida.
Good point.
The gas stations were out of fuel.
Yeah.
The
Matt-
lines were too long. Like you could drive that thing like all the way to Colorado.
Yeah, Matt and I drove it from Reno to here without getting fuel. It's
And like not to go on the prepper thing, but like that was a recent event that occurred where
like,
people couldn't leave.
like we could have a wildfire.
Yeah, for sure.
Where I'm at, where your dad's at,
Yeah,
where
sure.
Laura's parents are at, and it's literally happened.
Yeah, it
And
has.
you got to get out.
In the last 10 years, it's happened.
Yeah, I'd say, we've talked about it. It's critical to have a 600-mile range and, to have a
Yeah,
good
1,000
expedition
kilometers is our minimum standard.
truck.
Yeah.
I think that translates about the same.
Yep. 620 miles.
But to have at a minimum 1,000-mile range in these trucks.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's just it's just one of those things that's like really, really comfortable. It's, this whole thing, we're trying to make this so that you're not a slave to your vehicle, where I think like a Class A motorhome, any boat over 30 feet, you tend to bow
It
to
owns
it,
you.
right? It owns
Yeah.
you, and it becomes less fun and less, it's just like you're not spending as much time with your family. You're worried more about tires or whatever it might be, whatever could happen that does happen. We're trying to take this thing and make it as reliable as possible.
And what was interesting for me is that you guys solved the most difficult problem in this space, which is weight.
Yeah.
So by solving that most difficult problem, and this is the one that hasn't been solved properly, by solving the most difficult problem, by coming back to first principles and solving that, it actually made everything else better. It made everything else easier, and as a result, it makes the customer experience that much better. But congrats to you guys for like spending years solving the most difficult problem, which is how do we get regular tires? How do we get an expedition camper that can do Hell's Revenge, can comfortably sleep two people, could drive around the world, and it weighs as much as a sportsmobile? It's 13,000 pounds. That's insane.
Yeah, it's not much different if you had a Prospector with a sliding camper,
Yeah.
flatbed sliding camper. It's real similar, and that's talking about the 4-door, the 2-door one. I mean, if you think about this, if you really want to do some off-roading, we built the 2-door one with these guys, and the wheelbase is not much
It's the one I
different
would
than a
want.
Gladiator.
It's the one I would want
The
for sure.
camper's the same size. I mean, it's literally our tray bed Prospector, yet it's got the same size. It's the same size camper.
Sure.
I mean, and it's under 13. It's like 12.5 with a short wheelbase. I mean, it's
And that's
really
full of fuel
fun.
that you're measuring all that too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I think you guys have seen some of the photos of blasting around the
Bonkers.
desert. And
Bonkers.
And they're dual rear wheel trucks that have a 14,500 pound GVWR.
Yeah,
is what
and
you're
we
saying.
reduced that down because of the tires.
Yeah.
They can't quite handle that on the rear axle. They're about, call it 4,000 pounds per tire. And
Okay.
so the rear axles, we're trying to give you enough that you can tow 10,000 pounds with a 8,000 pound load. But, like we've discussed
So
before.
that's what, an 800 pound tongue weight, 850 pound tongue weight.
Yeah, 1,000 pounds.
You know what it kind of like feels to me is that, do you remember like when we went from TJ Wrangler to JK Wrangler, and that was like revolutionary. Like
Yeah,
it
not
just
evolution,
it
revolution.
just
Yeah, totally.
changed the game. Like there's definitely like other brands that have had evolutions of their product and they do get better. But this is like, to me, in the expedition vehicle space, a revolution. Like I'm dealing with a little bit less space, but the interior is great. Like that's the number one
Open.
question that I've kind of been getting is like, oh, is the interior done? That's the one with the interior. Like these people are messaging me. I'm like, yeah, the interior is good. Like the interior is like completely livable. I mean, I kind of had this opinion that it would be like Spartan, but it's,
Yeah, it's not super austere.
No, but
yeah.
it's luxurious in like its selection of materials and its design. It's very thoughtfully laid out. I mean, it is truly like a revolution. It is all made possible by like that carbon monocoque camper. Like if you try to do it with fiberglass, you're over your weight on the tire, and that now you're in MPTs. And if you're on MPTs, well then, you kind of have to go to like what the 45 or 5500, and then you might as well make it a little bit bigger or this or that or whatever. But
Yeah, weight begets more weight.
It's a
just the
slippery
sweet
slope.
spot. Like,
It's a slippery slope.
It's the sweet spot. It's that optimal solution.
And I think it's worth noting, the getting it lightweight is one thing, but there are a lot of, campers, RVs that, praise ultra light all over the side. This isn't ultra light and ultra flimsy. I mean, this is unbelievably well engineered.
Yeah.
So we're not cutting.
it's built like a brick house.
We're not cutting features. We're not cutting systems, like not cutting battery.
These were engineering problems that you had to overcome.
Yep, and it's all engineering and the manufacturing problems of building a shell that's that curvaceous with a nominally thick, fully cored 2-inch carbon fiber box that's vacuum infused that we do in house is unbelievable. How much time, my team of engineers has had to put in to be able to develop those parts. They're huge. It's a huge carbon fiber part.
I mean, I bet you the carbon fiber alone is like tens of thousands of dollars per camper.
It's a lot. Think how many
just the materials.
Think how many bicycle frames you could build with that much carbon fiber, and then go price a carbon fiber bicycle frame. And we don't. And there's I think composites is a buzzword in the industry right now. The simplest definition of a composite is two dissimilar materials bonded together.
Yeah,
you can get a concrete cinder block and a piece of plywood and some Gorilla Glue, and you have a composite. So not all composites are made the same. They're not all equal. There's different levels of resins, different levels of reinforcements, which are the fabrics. There's tons of different levels of foam core. And at TruckHouse, we don't cut a single corner. It's all epoxy. It's all foam from Sweden.
You
all
said
carbon.
it's expanded underwater, so it's consistent
Density, yeah, in
density.
Sweden, yeah. And then it's not, you'll see a lot of panel boxes being made out of FRP, that it's just a pre-made FRP sheet, laminated or vacuum pressed to a foam core. By us, being in full control of the laminate schedule, we call it, which is like where and what carbon and core goes in each location of the mold. We're able to add carbon, like we were saying, in the floor for the subfloor. We're able to add unidirectional carbon to support the cantilevered cab over. I mean, it's not just a blanket built carbon box. It's very intentional. We got to make sure that we're handling the dynamic loads and the cantilevered loads, and find that balance between strength and weight. And it's taken a lot of
what an exciting time, man. So when do you guys think you're going to have your first production delivery? Approximately.
We'll be early March. Yeah, so they're already. I mean,
and you've got a bunch of trucks already on pre-order.
We do.
There's going to be a backlog on that, which is normal. I think it's healthy for you guys as a business to have a little bit of a backlog. It's going to be exciting to start to see them running around.
Yeah,
and getting people's feedback on it.
And I don't think the price is terrible. I mean, like it's. You always have to check yourself and be like, yeah, it's $500,000. Like that's a lot of, like, that's a house, that's a lot of money. But we were kind of talking like this is something that you can park anywhere. You can't buy a cabin near a ski resort for $500,000. But $485 starting price, and that's with a gas cab chassis engine. Now, like, if I was just going to be in North America, Canada, I would probably want the diesel. But for we always love to bring it back to international travel. Gas is a better solution for international travel.
Currently.
Like in a couple years, maybe we'll have a, wider proliferation of ultra low sulfur diesel. But
go to Bolivia, you cannot get it.
Yeah, you cannot get it.
So.
And there's more countries on the Pan American Highway that do not have ultra low sulfur diesel than have it. So the gas engines, like, it's cool that is an option, because again, with the larger trucks, they have to have the diesel. Like, they cannot move the weight without it. So again, you just have more options. I think that's really cool.
Although you have a 1,200 mile range, so like if you go even in Bolivia, if you can get into the main city, you're going to find ultra low sulfur diesel, because they all want to drive.
That's another thing that you have to think about. And plan for.
Yeah,
you do have to plan for.
As of the last few years, Mexico, that was always a big concern. Mexico, but now you can get ultra low sulfur everywhere.
Yeah.
So for most people, Mexico, Canada, U.S., I would definitely highly recommend the diesel.
Yeah,
it's just awesome.
Yeah,
it's just amazing. But the gas engine will move it, and it'll move it just fine. And if you are going in countries where the speed limit's 62, 65, you're never going over 70. It's not a problem. It's not a problem in the U.S. It's just
It just depends on where you want to go.
Yeah.
And that, it speaks to how great this collaboration is Dave's got all that figured out with the Ram, and it's the same engineering on our front. So you're going to get the same product from TruckHouse. It's just you're not going to put the green handle in the fuel tank. I mean, that's the simple fact of it. It's going to work just like an AEV product. Yeah. And all the engineering of the integration from TruckHouse is the same. So
I built mine out online, and it was about $525. I added a couple options. You can add additional solar. It comes with 400 watts of solar.
Did you just say I built mine out? I heard that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oops. And on that bombshell,
I did the extra solar. I did the Starlink. I did the heated floors because
heated floors.
Yeah, like we're talking like
you have a sensitive,
sensitive
dog.
greyhound that has a sensitive dad. We were joking. Ex-Overland is doing a winter camp out in February, and how great it would be to show up in like robes and slippers while everybody's like,
smoking jackets.
It's a high of 18 degrees or something. It's supposed to be.
Oh, that'll be fun.
But
guys, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this podcast today. For everyone that's listening, it's really important to note that we do not have any financial agreement with TruckHouse. They're not an advertiser. This is not sponsored content. This is just a product that they're two people that we believe in, so we have some
we're friends with these people.
Yeah, we have bias there that should be disclosed, but it's a really important new product that reflects a lot of development in the industry. I think it will help other companies be better too. I think it will lift all ships. And these kinds of significant changes in engineering and performance, it does help the entire industry do better. So that's why we felt it was really important to talk about this stuff today. And the fact that it's here is pretty amazing. So that's a lot of work.
I'm just genuinely excited about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're genuinely excited about it. So
yeah, and we, thanks for driving it. Thanks for having us out.
Totally.
That's just
we're gonna go wheel it now.
I was just gonna say that's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's get you guys out camping in it. Let's get you guys out wheeling it.
Awesome.
That's a pre-production model. That's the worst one we're ever gonna build.
Yeah,
and it's
pretty good.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
It's only gonna get better. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, and we appreciate you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.